The HOA president was waist-deep in algae-covered water, mascara running down her face as Officer Reeves held up the court order. "Ma'am, you have to retrieve every single citation you threw in there yourself." Her designer pantsuit clung to her body like wet paper, and the smell of pond muck mixed with her expensive perfume created something truly awful. But 3 hours earlier, this same woman had my rescue horses surrounded by animal control, claiming they were destroying property values. She thought she'd won. She thought wrong. What she didn't know was that I'd been recording everything, and that pond she complained about, let's just say it held more than just water. Hey friends, before I tell you how a suburban dictator ended up swimming in karma, quick moment here. If these stories of standing up to bullies resonate with you, that little thanks button below helps me bring more of these tales to light. Your support, whether it's a comment about your own HOA nightmare or a coffee donation, literally keeps these stories coming. Because someone out there needs to hear that they're not alone in their fight. Now, let me tell you about Cordelia Blackthorne and her vendetta against my horses. My name is Silas Whitmore, and I'm 38 years old. After 12 years serving in Afghanistan, an IED ended my military career, but opened a door I never expected. During my recovery at Walter Reed, I discovered something that changed my life. Horses understand trauma in ways humans sometimes can't. They don't judge your nightmares or ask why you flinch at loud noises. They just stand there, solid and warm, teaching you how to breathe again. That's why I moved to Sage Hollow Estates 18 months ago, specifically choosing this 5-acre property at the edge of the development. The land came with old barns, good fencing, and most importantly, a natural spring-fed pond that had been there since before the neighborhood existed. Within 6 months, I'd established Whitmore Ranch Equine Therapy, a non-profit focused on helping veterans and first responders. 3 horses called this place home. Tempest was a thoroughbred I'd rescued from a kill pen. Her racing days ended by an owner who'd beaten her until she trusted no one. Luna came to me completely blind, abandoned in a field to starve because her previous owner deemed her worthless, and Phoenix, aptly named, survived a barn fire that left scars across his flanks, but somehow didn't touch his gentle spirit. Together, we formed an unlikely family of broken souls helping each other heal. The property was perfect for our needs. The main barn sat about 200 yards from the road, buffered by oak trees older than the subdivision itself. The pond stretched across the back corner of my land, spring-fed and crystal clear, surrounded by native grasses and wildflowers I'd planted to prevent erosion. On quiet mornings, you could watch herons fishing while the horses drank, and I'd often find veterans sitting on the bench I'd built, just watching the water and remembering how to find peace. The first few months were everything I dreamed. Local veterans started coming twice a week for sessions. A group of firefighters dealing with PTSD made Phoenix their unofficial mascot. Even some neighborhood kids would stop by after school. Learning responsibility by helping with evening feedings, that's when I found the first hint of trouble, though I didn't recognize it at the time. While cleaning out the old barn's storage room, I discovered a metal box containing property documents dating back decades. Mixed in with receipts for hay and vet bills were official-looking papers about water rights and easements. The language was dense with legal terminology, but one phrase appeared repeatedly: perpetual access to natural spring watershed. I tucked the box away, figuring it was just historical paperwork. If only I'd paid more attention then. Everything changed on a Tuesday morning in October. I was working with Tempest in the round pen when a white Lexus pulled up my gravel drive, moving too fast and honking repeatedly. The horses scattered, and Tempest, still learning to trust, pressed herself against the fence. Trembling, a woman emerged from the car like she was stepping onto a red carpet instead of a ranch. Cordelia Blackthorne stood about 5'6" in heels that had no business on farm property. Wearing a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, her blonde hair was styled in one of those helmets that could survive a hurricane, and she carried a leather folder like it contained nuclear codes. "Mr. Whitmore," she announced, not asked, her voice carrying that particular tone of someone used to being obeyed. "I'm Cordelia Blackthorne, president of the Sage Hollow Homeowners Association. We need to discuss your violations immediately." She said violations like I'd been running a meth lab instead of a horse rescue. The way she looked at my property, her nose slightly wrinkled as if the very air offended her, told me everything I needed to know about what kind of conversation this would be. I climbed over the fence, making sure to keep my voice calm. Tempest didn't need to sense my immediate dislike of this woman. What violations? I've been here over a year without any issues. Cordelia's smile could have frozen hell over. She opened her folder with a dramatic flourish, revealing pages of highlighted text and photographs. Mr. Whitmore, Sage Hollow Estates is a residential community, not a commercial farm. These animals are in clear violation of our covenant regarding livestock. She pronounced livestock like it was profanity, her eyes scanning my property with the calculating gaze of someone already planning its transformation. The documents she showed me were impressive in their official appearance. Headers with the HOA logo, multiple signatures, dates going back years. But something felt off. I'd read every HOA document when I bought this place, specifically checking for restrictions on horses. My real estate agent had confirmed multiple times that my property was grandfathered in for agricultural use. There's no restriction on horses in the covenant, I said, keeping my tone neutral despite the anger building in my chest. I checked thoroughly before purchasing. Cordelia's laugh was like breaking glass. Oh, Mr. Whitmore, I think you'll find that amendments were made last year. Section 15. Subsection C clearly states that no farm animals, including but not limited to horses, cattle, or swine, shall be kept within Sage Hollow boundaries. She pulled out a specific page, pointing to highlighted text with a manicured nail that looked sharp enough to draw blood. The amendment was dated 6 months before I'd moved in, which made no sense. How could my real estate agent have missed this? That's when I noticed something odd. Behind Cordelia, barely visible through her car's tinted windows, sat a man with a tablet, photographing my property. He wasn't trying to hide exactly, but he wasn't advertising his presence either. When he saw me looking, he raised the tablet higher, blocking his face. "Who's that?" I asked, nodding toward the car. Cordelia's composure cracked for just a second before reforming. "My husband Garrett. He's documenting the violations for our legal team." The way she said legal team was meant to intimidate, but it mostly made me curious. Why would you need documentation for a friendly neighborhood discussion? "Mrs. Blackthorne," I said, deliberately using her formal name. "These aren't just pets. This is a registered nonprofit providing therapy for veterans and first responders. Surely the HOA can appreciate the community service aspect." Her face tightened, like someone had turned a screw. "Community service? Mr. Whitmore, do you have any idea what those creatures are doing to our property values? The smell, the noise, the attraction of undesirable elements to our neighborhood? Undesirable elements." She meant the veterans, the men and women who'd served their country and came here seeking peace. My hands clenched involuntarily. The only noise complaints I've received have been compliments about how quiet the horses are, and there's no smell because I maintain the property meticulously. Cordelia stepped closer, and I caught a whiff of perfume so strong it made my eyes water. No wonder she complained about horse smell. She probably couldn't detect anything through that chemical cloud. "Furthermore," she continued, pulling out more papers, "there's the matter of that pond. It's a health hazard, attracting mosquitoes and creating a drowning risk for neighborhood children." Now I knew she was reaching. The pond was completely fenced, with posted no trespassing signs every 50 feet. The pond has been there longer than the neighborhood. I pointed out, it's a natural spring, not some stagnant pool. Her eyes narrowed at the word spring, and I saw Garrett lean forward in the car, suddenly very interested. It was a tiny reaction, but I'd spent years learning to read body language in combat zones. That word meant something to them. "Regardless," Cordelia said, recovering quickly, "you have 30 days to remove these animals and fill in that hazard, or we'll be forced to take legal action." She turned on her heel, somehow managing not to stumble despite the gravel, and marched back to her car. As they drove away, I noticed Garrett was still photographing, his tablet aimed specifically at the pond. That evening, I called my friend Thao Nguyen, who'd sold her property 6 months earlier. We'd met at the feed store when she warned me about buying special hay that turned out to be overpriced regular Timothy. "Silas," she said after I explained my visit. Get out now. That woman is evil incarnate. She made my life hell for 2 years before I finally gave up. Her voice carried a weariness that made my chest tight. What did she do? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. Started with complaints about my horses. Then mysterious reports to animal control. My fences were cut 3 times. Always when I was away. She filed 17 different complaints with the county, each one requiring inspections and legal fees to fight. But the worst part? Thou paused, and I could hear her taking a steadying breath. She kept asking about water rights. Wanted to know if I had any old documents about the creek that ran through my property. When I wouldn't sell to her husband's company, things got worse. Water rights. There it was again. Thou, did your property have any natural water features? I asked, thinking about those documents in my barn. An old creek bed, mostly dry, except during spring rains. But Cordelia acted like it was made of gold. She even had someone trespassing at night, taking soil samples near where the water ran. The pieces were starting to form a picture I didn't like. How much did they offer for your land? The silence stretched before she answered. Half what I paid for it. They said once the county condemned it for health violations, I'd be lucky to get anything. After we hung up, I went to the barn and retrieved that box of documents. Under the light of my work lamp, I spread them across the tack room table. Most were mundane. Receipts, old veterinary records, correspondence about hay deliveries, but at the bottom, wrapped in plastic, were papers that made my blood run cold. Water rights certificate. Issued 1887. Perpetual and transferable. The legal language was archaic, but the meaning was clear. Whoever owned this land controlled water access for nearly 50 acres of surrounding property. I spent the next 3 hours researching online, cross-referencing property records and geological surveys. The spring that fed my pond wasn't just any water source. It was part of an aquifer that extended under most of Sage Hollow estates. More importantly, it was the only surface access point for that aquifer within miles. Any development wanting to tap into that water would need permission from whoever held these rights. My little ranch wasn't just sitting on valuable land. It was sitting on the key to millions of dollars in development potential. The next morning brought my first real taste of Cordelia's tactics. I woke at 5 a.m. to feed the horses, and found something wrong immediately. The gate to the mare's pasture stood wide open. Luna was still there, her blindness keeping her close to familiar territory. But I spent 2 hours tracking down Tempest and Phoenix, who'd wandered onto the adjacent property. As I led them back, I noticed fresh tire tracks by the gate. Someone had been here during the night. I installed cameras that afternoon. Nothing fancy. Just basic motion-activated units covering the gates and barn entrances. If someone was trespassing, I wanted proof. The installation took most of the day, and I was just finishing when an official-looking truck pulled up. Miami-Dade Animal Control was painted on the side, and my stomach dropped. A young officer stepped out, looking uncomfortable. Mr. Whitmore, I'm Officer Jennifer Dalton. We received a complaint about neglected horses. I knew this dance from Thau's stories. Stay calm. Be cooperative. Document everything. Of course. Officer, would you like to see the horses? I have all their veterinary records as well. Jennifer relaxed slightly. She'd probably expected resistance. As we walked toward the pasture, she said quietly, "Between you and me, we get calls about your place every few days. Always the same complainant. My supervisor is getting pretty tired of it." Tempest chose that moment to canter across the field, her coat gleaming in the afternoon sun, muscle rippling with health. Phoenix followed, throwing in a little buck just for the joy of it. Even Luna, guided by her other senses, moved with the confidence of a well-cared-for animal. Jennifer actually smiled. "Yeah, these are clearly suffering," she said dryly. "Let me see those vet records so I can file my report." As she reviewed the paperwork, she made a comment that chilled me. "You're the third horse property we've been called to this month. All the complaints come from the same source. All the properties have water features. Weird coincidence, right?" She handed back my records. "Everything in perfect order. Word of advice? Document everything. And maybe talk to the others who've been targeted. Strength in numbers and all that." That evening, I made 2 decisions. First, I'd gather every scrap of evidence I could about Cordelia's harassment campaign. Second, I'd dig deeper into why water rights mattered so much to her and her husband. The cameras were already paying off. At 11:43 p.m., they captured a figure in dark clothing approaching my fence line. The person spent several minutes photographing the pond, then appeared to throw something into the water before leaving. The image quality wasn't great, but the build and movement pattern looked familiar. The next few days brought an escalation in tactics. My business phone rang constantly with calls about concerned citizens worried about health hazards. Someone reported me to the health department, the zoning commission, and even the EPA. Each agency had to investigate, and each investigation found nothing wrong. But the disruption to my therapy schedule was significant. Veterans who came here for peace found themselves questioned by officials. Some stopped coming altogether, not wanting the hassle. Then came the letters, not just from the HOA, but from a law firm with a name so long it needed 2 lines on the letterhead: cease and desist orders, threats of liens, warnings about criminal prosecution for maintaining an attractive nuisance. Each letter cost money to have my lawyer respond to. Death by 1,000 paper cuts, all perfectly legal, all designed to break me financially and emotionally. But Cordelia made one crucial mistake. In her eagerness to document my violations, she'd been trespassing regularly. My cameras caught her, throwing not just objects but papers into my pond. Official-looking documents that floated briefly before sinking. Why would anyone throw away evidence? Unless, of course, they weren't real documents at all. I started fishing them out whenever I could, carefully drying and preserving what turned out to be forged inspection reports, fake compliance orders, and HOA notices for violations that had never been voted on. The pattern became clear after I met with 2 other targeted property owners. Both had water features. Both had been harassed until they sold below market value. And both sales had gone to the same company, Blackthorn Development, LLC, Garrett's company. They weren't just bullying people for HOA power trips. This was a coordinated scheme to acquire water rights for a massive development project. The plans, which I found through public records requests, showed a luxury golf resort needing millions of gallons of water annually. Water they could only access through properties like mine. On a Thursday morning, exactly 3 weeks after Cordelia's first visit, I was preparing for what I knew would be their final assault. She'd been escalating her complaints, and Officer Dalton had warned me that someone was pushing hard for an emergency seizure order. They're claiming the horses have a contagious disease. She'd told me off the record. Complete nonsense. But if they get the right judge to sign off, animal control will have to act. I spent that morning moving my most important documents to a safety deposit box and backing up all my digital evidence to cloud storage. The horses seemed to sense my tension, staying closer than usual during their morning turnout. Luna kept nickering softly, her way of offering comfort. Phoenix stood guard at the gate, ears pricked for any sign of trouble. And Tempest, who'd come so far in learning to trust again, actually approached me for scratches. Something she'd never done before. That's when I saw the convoy approaching, not just Cordelia's white Lexus, but an animal control trailer, 2 police cars, and what looked like a veterinary van. My phone rang immediately. Jennifer Dalton, stress evident in her voice. Silas, I'm so sorry. They got an emergency order. Some vet named Dr. Patricia Hollowell signed a statement saying your horses tested positive for equine infectious anemia. We have to seize them immediately. My blood turned to ice. EIA was serious. But my horses had been tested negative just 2 months ago. This was impossible unless... I grabbed my phone and started recording as the convoy pulled into my driveway. If they were going to steal my horses, every second would be documented. Cordelia emerged from her Lexus, wearing a pristine white suit, as if she'd dressed for a celebration. Behind her, Dr. Patricia Hollowell stepped out of the veterinary van carrying an official-looking folder. She was a thin woman with sharp features who avoided eye contact as she approached. The police officers looked uncomfortable, especially Officer Reeves, whom I'd met at a community event just last month. Mr. Whitmore. Cordelia's voice carried across the yard like a victory speech. Dr. Hollowell has certified that your horses are infected with equine infectious anemia. For the safety of the community, they must be removed immediately. She couldn't quite hide the satisfaction in her voice. Behind her, I noticed Garrett sitting in their car again, this time with a professional camera, documenting what they assumed would be my defeat. I kept my voice steady, despite the rage building inside me. I'd like to see the test results. Dr. Hollowell, my horses were tested negative for EIA 8 weeks ago. The vet shifted nervously, clutching her folder tighter. New tests were conducted. The results are conclusive. Something about the way she said it, the way her eyes darted to Cordelia before speaking, told me everything I needed to know. This woman was either being paid or pressured. What new tests? I pressed. When were blood samples taken? I've been here every day, and no one has been near my horses. Dr. Hollowell's facade cracked slightly. Samples were collected from environmental sources. The pond water showed contamination. Even the police officers exchanged glances at that. You don't test pond water for a blood-borne disease that only affects horses. It was such an obvious lie that I almost laughed. Jennifer Dalton approached me quietly while Cordelia was directing the trailer positioning. Silas, I'm required to take the horses, but I promise they'll be held safely pending investigation. Document everything. This whole thing stinks. She handed me paperwork to sign, and I noticed her pen had a small camera attached. She was recording too. Smart woman. As they prepared to load my horses, something beautiful and heartbreaking happened. Tempest, who 6 months ago would have panicked at strangers approaching, walked calmly to me and rested her head against my chest. Luna, guided by Phoenix, made her way over as well. They stood with me, trusting despite the chaos around us. Even the animal control officers seemed moved by the display. I'll get you back, I whispered to each of them as they were loaded. This isn't over. Cordelia heard me and laughed. Oh, Mr. Whitmore, I think you'll find it is. Once these diseased animals are destroyed, we can finally address the health hazard of that pond. That's when I knew she'd overplayed her hand. She just admitted, in front of witnesses and on multiple recordings, that this was about the pond, not the horses. The convoy left with my horses, and I stood in my empty barn feeling a cold fury I hadn't experienced since Afghanistan. But this wasn't a war zone where violence solved problems. This required intelligence, evidence, and patience. Cordelia had made this personal, and she was about to learn why you don't corner a combat veteran who has nothing left to lose. I spent the next hour on the phone with my lawyer, Rebecca Sterling, no relation to Cordelia. Thankfully, Rebecca was a former prosecutor who specialized in property rights and had a particular hatred for HOA overreach. Silas, testing pond water for EIA is like testing air for diabetes. No legitimate vet would sign off on that. This Hollowell is either incompetent or corrupt. She promised to file emergency injunctions immediately. That afternoon, I did something Cordelia never expected. I went on offense. First, I called every media contact I had from my therapy program. Local news loved feel-good veteran stories, and I'd built good relationships with several reporters. Within hours, 3 news vans were parked outside Sage Hollow Estates, interviewing anyone who would talk about the HOA president who seized therapy horses from a disabled veteran. Next, I visited Dr. Patricia Hollowell's clinic. It was a rundown facility on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that probably struggled to stay afloat. The receptionist looked surprised to see me. Is Dr. Hollowell available? I'd like to discuss the test results for my horses. The woman's face went pale. She's not in today. Or tomorrow. Actually, she's taking a sabbatical blank. Interesting. A vet who just signed a major health order suddenly disappears. I left my card with a simple message. I know she was pressured. If she wants to tell the truth, I'll help protect her. Sometimes the carrot works better than the stick. As I walked back to my truck, I noticed a familiar white Lexus parked across the street. Cordelia was having me followed. Good. Let her see that I wasn't giving up. That evening brought an unexpected ally. Dr. Esperanza Reyes, the state veterinarian, called me directly. Mr. Whitmore, I've been reviewing the seizure order for your horses. Something's not right. I never authorized any EIA testing. And Dr. Hollowell isn't certified to make emergency health declarations. Can you meet me at the holding facility tomorrow morning? I arrived at the animal control facility at 7 a.m. to find Dr. Frace. Rhea's already there. Along with Rebecca and a court reporter, Jennifer Dalton met us at the entrance. Was relief evident on her face? Thank God you're here. Those horses are the healthiest animals we've ever seized. This whole thing is insane. She led us to the holding area where Tempest, Luna, and Phoenix were being kept. They nickered when they saw me. And Phoenix actually kicked his stall door in greeting. Dr. Reyes conducted a thorough examination of each horse, taking legitimate blood samples and checking vital signs. These animals are in excellent condition. She announced for the record, no signs of illness. Excellent body condition. Clear eyes and breathing. Whoever claimed they have EIA is either grossly incompetent or deliberately lying. She turned to the court reporter. I'm ordering immediate release of these animals back to their owner and launching a formal investigation into Dr. Patricia Hollowell's license. As we prepared to load the horses for their return home, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. They offered me $50,000 to sign those papers. I have recordings. Please help. It had to be Hollowell. I showed the message to Rebecca, who smiled like a shark scenting blood. Got them. She said simply, the media coverage that evening was brutal for Cordelia. HOA president seizes veterans therapy horses on false pretenses, led the 6 o'clock news. They interviewed several veterans who'd benefited from my program, including a young woman who credited Phoenix with helping her overcome PTSD. The contrast between their heartfelt testimonials and Cordelia's refusal to comment was damning, but Cordelia wasn't done. That night, my cameras captured multiple figures around my property. They weren't subtle anymore. Openly dumping something into the pond and spreading what looked like chemical powder around the fence line. I called 911 immediately. There are trespassers on my property, contaminating my water source. The dispatcher, recognizing my address from the news, promised immediate response. The police arrived to find Cordelia, Garrett, and 2 other HOA board members standing by my pond with industrial containers. The smell of chlorine was overwhelming. They'd been pouring pool chemicals into my natural spring, trying to create the contamination they'd failed to prove. Officer Reeves looked genuinely angry as he surveyed the scene. Mrs. Blackthorne, what are you doing on Mr. Whitmore's property at 11 p.m.? Cordelia tried to brazen it out. We're addressing the health hazard this pond represents. As HOA president, I have the authority to remediate dangerous conditions. Reeves wasn't buying it. Ma'am, you're trespassing on private property and contaminating a water source. That's a federal offense. The EPA had classified natural springs as protected waters, something Cordelia apparently didn't know. As they were being detained, I noticed something floating in the pond where they'd been dumping chemicals. Papers. Dozens of them. In her haste to contaminate the water, Cordelia had apparently dropped a folder full of documents. I pointed them out to Reeves. Officer, I think those might be important evidence. He looked at the papers, slowly dispersing across the pond's surface. Then at Cordelia, and I saw the moment he decided to make this interesting. Mrs. Blackthorne, those appear to be HOA documents you've littered into a protected waterway. You'll need to retrieve them immediately. Cordelia's face went through several shades of red. That's ridiculous. I'm not going in there. Reeves smiled slightly. Ma'am, you just admitted to putting chemicals in this water. Either you retrieve those documents now, proving the water is safe, or we charge you with creating a hazardous environment. Your choice. The standoff lasted about 30 seconds before Cordelia realized she was trapped. If she refused to enter the water, she'd be admitting to creating a dangerous condition. If she retrieved the papers, she'd be humiliating herself in front of the gathering crowd. Because yes, neighbors had started arriving, drawn by the police lights and commotion. Some were recording on their phones. Garrett tried to intervene. This is ridiculous. We'll pay a fine for littering. But Reeves wasn't having it. Sir, those papers could contain evidence related to the false seizure of Mr. Whitmore's horses. They need to be retrieved as evidence. Your wife dropped them, she retrieves them. Rebecca had arrived by this point and was practically glowing with satisfaction. Officer Reeves is correct. Those documents could be material evidence in multiple investigations. That's how Cordelia Blackthorne, president of the Sage Hollow HOA, ended up wading into my pond at midnight in her designer suit. The water came up to her waist as she struggled to grab floating papers, her perfect hair wilting, mascara running in black streams down her face. Every few steps, she'd mutter about lawsuits and revenge, but she kept going, retrieving page after page of what turned out to be forged HOA violations, fake meeting minutes, and fraudulent property assessments. The crowd grew larger, and someone started live streaming. "Is that the HOA lady who was on the news?" became a common whisper. Cordelia's humiliation was complete when she slipped on a moss-covered rock and went under completely, emerging with pondweed in her hair and a defeated expression that said she knew her reign of terror was over. It took her nearly an hour to retrieve all the documents, each one carefully bagged as evidence by the police. By the end, she was shivering, covered in algae, and had lost both her shoes to the pond's muddy bottom. The gathered crowd didn't laugh. That would have been too cruel. Instead, they watched in satisfied silence as karma played out in real time. Dr. Patricia Hollowell turned state's witness the next day. She arrived at the police station with a lawyer and a box full of recordings. The story she told was worse than I'd imagined. Cordelia and Garrett had been running this scheme for 3 years, targeting properties with water features across 3 counties. They'd bribe or threaten officials, create false violations, and then swoop in to buy the distressed properties at fraction of their value. My property was special because of those 1,887 water rights. Garrett's development company had already sold lots to investors based on promised water access they didn't actually have. They needed my land to avoid fraud charges from their investors. The pressure to acquire it had made them desperate and sloppy. Hollowell had recorded every conversation, every threat, every bribe offer. She'd been building her own insurance policy, knowing that eventually the scheme would collapse. The FBI got involved when it became clear this crossed state lines. Cordelia and Garrett had properties in multiple states running similar schemes. The scope was staggering. Millions in fraudulent property transfers, dozens of families displaced, entire communities disrupted. My little horse ranch had been the domino that brought down a criminal empire. During the investigation, more evidence surfaced. The pond chemicals Cordelia had dumped were traced to HOA funds, meant for community landscaping. She'd been embezzling for years, using HOA money to fund her harassment campaigns. The fake documents she'd been throwing in my pond were attempts to create a paper trail that didn't exist, planning to discover them later as evidence of violations. 3 months later, I sat in a federal courthouse watching Cordelia and Garrett's sentencing. She'd traded her designer suits for orange jumpsuit, and her perfect hair was now gray at the roots. The judge, after reviewing the evidence, didn't mince words. "You weaponized bureaucracy to steal from hardworking families. You perverted the very concept of community governance for personal gain. The court sentences you to 15 years federal prison for racketeering, fraud, and conspiracy." Garrett got 12 years. The other conspirators received various sentences based on their involvement. Dr. Hollowell, in exchange for her cooperation, got probation and community service, which she served at my ranch, helping with the horses she'd almost condemned. It was Rebecca's idea, a form of restorative justice that helped her understand the harm she'd almost caused. The Sage Hollow HOA dissolved after the scandal. Turns out, Cordelia had been falsifying membership votes for years. Most residents hadn't even wanted an HOA, but were told it was mandatory. Without her manufactured authority, the community voted overwhelmingly to disband and return to simple neighbor-to-neighbor communication. My horses returned home to a hero's welcome. The community that had once been divided by Cordelia's tactics came together to support the ranch. Veterans who'd stopped coming returned with friends. Local businesses donated supplies, even some former HOA board members, freed from Cordelia's influence, volunteered to help repair damage from the harassment campaign. The pond, despite Cordelia's chemical assault, recovered quickly. The natural spring flow flushed out the contaminants within weeks. I had it tested monthly for a year, and it always came back pristine. The water rights I'd inherited became a conservation trust, ensuring no future development could drain the aquifer. It was Dad's last gift, protecting not just my land but the entire community's water future. Jennifer Dalton left animal control to become a veterinary technician. Inspired by seeing how the horses had helped veterans heal, she now works part-time at the ranch, helping with our expanded therapy programs. Officer Reeves stops by occasionally, always joking about the night he made an HOA president swim for justice. The story became legend in local law enforcement, a reminder that sometimes creative problem-solving works better than strict procedure. Dr. Esperanza Reyes used the case to push through state reforms on emergency animal seizures. Now, multiple independent vets must confirm any disease claims before horses can be removed from their homes. She called it Tempest's Law, after my thoroughbred who'd stood so bravely during the seizure. The legislation passed unanimously, with several lawmakers citing the Sage Hollow scandal as proof of need for reform. A year later, I expanded the ranch onto the adjacent property. One of Cordelia's former victims sold it to me at a fair price, happy to see it used for good instead of greed. We now serve 50 veterans a week, with 6 horses and a waiting list for our programs. The pond has a new deck where people can sit and reflect, with a small plaque reading, "Still waters run deep, but justice runs deeper." Sometimes, on quiet mornings, I stand where Cordelia once stood, demanding I remove my horses, the same spot where she later crawled out of the pond, defeated and exposed. The horses graze peacefully, veterans find healing, and the water flows clear and free. It's not the retirement I planned after Afghanistan, but it's the purpose I needed. The last I heard, Cordelia was teaching crafts in federal prison. Ironically, helping other inmates learn patience and following rules, real ones this time. Garrett's development company was liquidated, with assets going to a fund for HOA abuse victims. Their house in Sage Hollow sold to a lovely family with 3 kids, and a strong appreciation for property rights and neighborly respect. People sometimes ask if I feel bad about what happened to Cordelia. I think about the families she destroyed, the dreams she crushed, the communities she divided. Then I look at Tempest, who learned to trust again. Luna, who navigates life fearlessly despite her blindness. And Phoenix, who rose from literal ashes to help others heal. No, I don't feel bad. Justice isn't revenge when it stops predators from creating more victims. The HOA industry nationwide took notice of the Sage Hollow scandal. New regulations, better oversight, and mandatory ethics training became standard. Cordelia Blackthorne became a cautionary tale taught in property management courses. To house how the pursuit of power can lead to swimming in your own lies, literally and figuratively. These days, Sage Hollow is known for its community, spirit, and the therapy ranch that brought neighbors together. Property values actually increased once people realized they could live without petty tyranny. The pond that Cordelia saw as a tool for control became a symbol of resilience and natural justice. Water, after all, always finds its level, and those who try to manipulate its flow often end up all wet. My horses still drink from that pond every morning, and sometimes I swear they look toward the spot where Cordelia took her midnight swim. Maybe they remember, maybe they don't, but they're free. They're healthy, and they're helping people heal. That's all that matters. Well, that and the fact that every HOA president within 100 miles knows the story of the woman who tried to chase out horses and ended up swimming in karma. Sometimes the best deterrent isn't rules or regulations. It's a cautionary tale about what happens when you mistake authority for righteousness and power for justice. The spring still feeds the pond, clear and constant. A reminder that some things can't be controlled, contained, or corrupted, just like the human spirit, just like the bond between horses and humans, and just like the truth that eventually surfaces no matter how deep you try to bury it under false documents and designer suits. In the end, Cordelia learned what every horse person knows: you can lead a tyrant to water, and sometimes, justice means making them wade right in. One morning, a woman named Patricia Hollowell arrived at the ranch, not the corrupt vet who'd signed false documents, but her daughter, Emma. She was in her 20s, fresh out of veterinary school, and mortified by her mother's actions. "I need to make amends," she said, standing at the gate with tears in her eyes. "My mother taught me to help animals. then betrayed everything she stood for. Please, let me volunteer. Let me prove not all Hollowells are corrupt. Emma became one of our most dedicated volunteers, eventually joining as our full-time veterinary assistant. Her presence was redemptive for everyone, proof that sins of the parents don't have to define the children. She had a special gift with traumatized animals, perhaps understanding something about shame and the need for second chances. When we rescued a mare from a neglect situation, Emma spent nights sleeping in the barn until the horse learned to trust again. The legal ramifications continued to unfold like a dropped ball of yarn. Investigators found that Cordelia and Garrett had connections to similar schemes in 7 states. The FBI uncovered a whole network of corrupt HOA officials, bought veterinarians, and bribed inspectors. My case had been the thread that, when pulled, unraveled a nationwide conspiracy affecting hundreds of families. A class action lawsuit was filed on behalf of all victims, with Rebecca Sterling as lead counsel. The settlement negotiations took 2 years, but eventually, victims received compensation from seized assets and insurance policies. Some families were able to buy back homes they'd lost. Others, like Thauwin, used the money to start over somewhere new. She sent me photos from her new ranch in Montana, where her horses ran free without any HOA in sight. One of the most satisfying developments came from the state legislature, Senator Maria Gonzalez, whose own mother had been victimized by a corrupt HOA in another county. Sponsored comprehensive reform legislation. The Sage Hollow Act required transparency in all HOA operations, limited their enforcement powers, and created an oversight board for complaints. No longer could a single person wield unchecked power over their neighbors' lives. During the legislative hearings, I testified alongside other victims, but the most powerful moment came when Jennifer Dalton, now Dr. Dalton, after completing her veterinary degree, brought Tempest into the Capitol building as a therapy animal for stressed legislators. Watching my once traumatized thoroughbred calmly navigate marble halls, offering comfort to powerful people, was a full-circle moment I'll never forget. The media attention had unexpected benefits. Donations poured in from across the country, allowing us to build a proper therapy center with year-round facilities. We added an indoor arena for winter sessions, accessible paths for wheelchair users, and a memorial garden overlooking the pond. Each major donor received a handmade horseshoe from our farrier, painted by veterans in art therapy sessions, but not everything was smooth sailing. About a year after the trial, we faced a new challenge. A group calling itself Property Rights First started targeting our ranch, claiming we were lowering surrounding property values with our commercial operation, led by a man named Richard Steinbeck. They tried to use zoning laws to shut us down. It felt like Cordelia's ghost returning for revenge. Rebecca was ready this time. She'd helped us structure everything properly. The ranch was a registered 501(3) nonprofit. We had all necessary permits, and our agricultural exemption was ironclad. When Steinbeck tried to rally neighbors against us, he found a community that had learned its lesson about petty tyrants. The city council meeting where he presented his complaints turned into a 3-hour testimonial about how much the ranch meant to the community. Veteran after veteran stood up to speak. Parents talked about how their children with autism had found peace with our horses. A retired police officer credited Luna with helping him through PTSD after a shooting incident. Even the mayor revealed that she'd been secretly attending sessions with Phoenix after her own military service. Steinbeck left that meeting defeated, and his organization dissolved shortly after. Sometimes communities develop immunity to toxic leadership. The ranch's influence spread beyond therapy. Local schools started bringing students for educational visits, learning about horse care, water ecology, and history. We partnered with the agriculture department at the state university, hosting internships for students interested in animal-assisted therapy. Luna, despite her blindness, became famous for teaching children about disabilities and adaptation. She had her own Instagram account run by Emma, with 50,000 followers watching her navigate life fearlessly. 3 years after Cordelia's midnight swim, I stood at the pond's edge during our first annual Freedom Festival, a celebration of survival, justice, and community healing. Over 500 people attended, including many who'd been victims of HOA abuse across the state. Food trucks donated their services, local bands played for free, and the horses gave demonstration rides all day. The highlight came when we unveiled a statue commissioned by the Historical Society. It showed a horse drinking from a spring, with a figure in period clothing, representing both the Underground Railroad travelers and modern veterans finding freedom from their trauma. The inscription read, "Water remembers, from freedom seekers to freedom keepers. This spring flows for all." During the ceremony, I noticed a familiar figure at the back of the crowd. Dr. Patricia Hollowell, the corrupt vet, had completed her community service and stayed on as a volunteer. She approached hesitantly, her daughter Emma by her side. "Mr. Whitmore," she said quietly, "I wanted to thank you for giving me a chance to make things right. I was weak when Cordelia pressured me, but you showed me that redemption is possible." She handed me an envelope. Inside was a check for $50,000, the exact amount Cordelia had offered her to falsify documents. "It's taken me 3 years to save this up," she explained. "I want it to go toward a scholarship fund for veterans who want to become equine therapists." The Patricia Hollowell Redemption Scholarship has since helped 12 veterans start new careers, turning their trauma into healing for others. The festival also brought unexpected reunions. Several families who'd been driven away by Cordelia's harassment returned to visit. They shared stories of starting over, or of communities that welcomed them, of lessons learned about standing up to bullies. One couple had started their own nonprofit in Texas, helping other HOA abuse victims navigate legal challenges. The network of survivors had become activists, ensuring no one faced these battles alone. As the sun set on the festival, painting the pond in the same golden hues I'd seen on my first day here, I found myself thinking about ripples. Cordelia had thrown stones of hatred into our community's water, creating waves of destruction. But every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Her cruelty had sparked kindness, her division had created unity, and her attempt to destroy had ultimately built something beautiful. The horses gathered at the water's edge for their evening drink, a daily ritual that had become symbolic for our community. Tempest, now confident and trusting, led the way. Luna followed the sound of her hoofbeats, never hesitating despite her lack of sight. Phoenix brought up the rear, his scars barely visible in the fading light, but his spirit unbowed. The pond stretched across the back corner of my land, spring-fed and crystal clear, surrounded by native grasses and wildflowers I'd planted to prevent erosion. On quiet mornings, you could watch herons fishing while the horses drank, and I'd often find veterans sitting on the bench I'd built, just watching the water and remembering how to find peace. The first few months were everything I'd dreamed. Local veterans started coming twice a week for sessions. The spring that sustained escaped slaves, that survived chemical assault, that revealed corruption and brought justice, continues its ancient work, offering life to all who approach with honest need and open hearts.